Hey guys, MiniWargamer Mike here from MiniWarGaming.com. You probably remember this Tau stealth suit. This is our custom XV15 stealth suit from a previous tutorial. Today we're going to paint it. And I'm not just going to paint it normally. I mean, I am going to do that as well. It's going to have a nice slick blue paint job. But I'm also going to show you how to do the stealth effect on a Tau battlesuit. And what I mean by that is this guy right here. We have this gradient effect where it actually looks like he's sort of phasing into the terrain. If you look at his foot, you can barely even tell it's there, and really just gives it a very stealthy appearance. And sort of makes it look like he's either dropping his cloaking field or turning it on at the moment. So we're going to show you how to achieve this. But of course, first we need a basic paint job done. And since we haven't done a base coat yet on this model, we're going to start with Chaos Black. The reason I'm using black is because there's a lot of areas on this model that are very hard to reach that I want to appear shadowed if we don't manage to paint them or if we just choose not to paint them. The easiest way to make unpainted parts of a model look shadowed is to just base it with black in the first place. You can also use a really dark gray as well. It gives the same appearance but isn't quite as stark as using black is. When you're doing this, you also want to make sure you get the black into all the extra little crevices. Especially on Tau units, they have a lot of linear details, like the creases in the weapon here. And watching me base coat is probably incredibly exciting. Okay, so we're going to just skip ahead a minute here and I'll show you once the base coat is done. Okay, so I finished base coating the model with Chaos Black. Now the one thing to note here is that Chaos Black is a very shiny paint. You see a lot of light reflecting off this. It kind of gives it a plastic metal sort of look. And the problem is when you get that, when we're basing a model with Chaos Black, it's because we want deep shadows in the areas we can't really reach or don't want to detail. And you don't really want light reflecting off a shadow. It's sort of counterintuitive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little Reaper Pure Black, which is a very matte finish black instead. And we're just going to brush that over the model, especially in the cracks and crevices. And that'll just really help tone down the shininess. Now I'm not using a flow improver or anything like that with this. I'm just going to use it straight and almost use it in a dry brush fashion. Because we don't need to really coat the whole thing. We just want to tone down the shininess, which just means we need more or less a light dusting of a matte finish black over the model. There's no real method to this. We just want to make sure we hit most of the areas, especially the deeper parts of the model. The back of the head, or around the head where it's sort of that clothy, loose look under the helmet, is a really good place to focus this onto. I'm just going to keep going anywhere that looks really shiny. Just hit it a few times. And also if I had some, I could have just added a matte additive into the Chaos Black, which would help tone down that shininess it has. But this is just about as quick. So you can see now, not quite as shiny. I've got some pretty harsh lighting here right now. I've got sun coming through the window that way. So, I mean, we're still going to get a lot of shine on here. But it's not quite as sharp. It's a little more diffused now. And it definitely looks better in person. It just doesn't have that same really harsh punch on the angles. So now we're ready to actually start painting. So first thing I'm going to do is paint the helmet and a couple of the other details, the shoulder pads, the chest pad specifically, and sort of there's a piece of armor, well basically it's a crotch plate right here, and there's a butt protector for lack of a better word. I'm going to paint all those up with a shade of blue, and I'm going to be using Reaper's Breon Blue for this. I just really love this shade. Just be extra careful around the optics. I don't want to get blue up on that area. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same on the shoulder pads here. On this shoulder pad I'm going to avoid painting the sept detail. Same with the chest, I'll leave that area blank. And I'll be right back once that's done. Okay, so we've gone ahead and added our blue detailing. I've also added a little bit to the weapon as well, just to break up, just under here and up here, just to break up the blackness of the model. And you're supposed to be stealthy, but you still want some color on here. You want it to look good on the table. And black models just look primed. What I'm going to do, just to break it up a little bit more, I'm going to use a darker blue to just color the two calves, just to break up the legs a little bit. I'm going to use Reaper's Midnight Blue for that. It's a very dark blue, but it'll just look different from black. It won't quite have the same depth to it. You can already see that it's a little bit nicer than just a solid wave of black there. I'm just going to go ahead and do the other leg as well. Okay, now I've painted both thighs with the darker blue, the Midnight Blue. I've also just painted the end of the gun as well, just to, again, break up the black. There was a whole wall of black when you looked at it that way. There's a couple things left to do. I want to paint the Tau symbols. I want to paint those both white. We have to add the eye optics right there and there. We'll do them in red. And then I just want to add a little detailing to the antennas. And then we'll start highlighting. So I'm going to use Reaper Ghost White for this. It's just a slightly bluish tinted white. You probably can't see it there because it's just so bright in here at the moment. I just find that when you use straight white, things just look a little bit off because it's just almost too bright. When you're painting finer details like this, you want very, very little paint on your brush. You're better off having to go over something 2 or 3 times than getting it once, globbing it on, and not really getting the shape you were looking for. Sometimes it's good to just change the way you're holding the model too. Play to your strengths. If you only do good brush strokes in a particular direction, keep changing the orientation of the model until it's in that direction. I'm not saying you shouldn't try new things, but if a certain direction works really well for you, you'll end up with better results. Okay, it's not too bad. Got a little bit of touch up to do, and the little dot in the middle could be bigger. Okay, so I've just got a little touch up to do here in the middle. Just grab a little bit of black paint and clean that up. And I'll do the one on the shoulder off the camera, just because I need to be really close to the model to do that fine detail. Okay, so I've gone ahead and painted the 2 sep details, and just touched up that little area where I got the white across the middle. So next thing we're going to do is the eyes, or rather the optics, and we're going to give them a gemmed effect. Now this effect you can use on lots of different armies. Space Marine visors, gems in fantasy settings, all look really good when you do this. What we're going to do is take a deep red and then a really bright red. We're going to use Phoenix Red. It's almost a shade of orange. In fact, it is a little bit orangey. And it's one of the few cases where I will actually use pure white. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint the entire optic with the deep red first. You pretty much just have to touch the brush to it. Okay, so we've got our red in place. Then we're going to take the lighter shade of red, and just very carefully I'm going to paint a line across the bottom to the right of the optic. The problem is when you're working with this little amount of paint, it can actually dry on the brush while you're waiting to use it. So it's important to use a wet brush just to keep the paint fresh a little bit longer. Okay, you can already see that gemming effect really starting to come into play. Then the last thing we want to do is just add a dot of pure white to both. And I'm not going to use a paintbrush for this, I'm going to use a toothpick. Just take a regular toothpick, nice point on the end, and just dip the point in your paint. Not too much, you only want a little bit on there. And then just very carefully dot the upper left corner. Just like that. You can see now we've gone from a pretty flat little optic to what looks like a nice rounded gem appearance. And even on the smaller one, which is a lot harder to do the detail on, we really got that same approach. So all it is a darker color, and then a splash of a lighter shade of that color across the bottom to one side, then a white dot opposite where you just put that previous splash. And we get a really nice, simple gem effect. So the next thing we're going to do is highlighting. And we're going to do that first around all the blue areas we've painted. Now we used Breon blue for most of the armor plates there. So we're going to go one shade lighter and use Templar blue for the highlighting. I'm also going to mix in just a little bit of flow improver just so we can get nice thin lines. So we'll get the Breon out of there. So here's my wonderful palette. I'm just going to get a drop or so of Breon on, or the Templar blue there, and then just a touch of flow improver. I'm going to take my fine detail brush and just mix that together. You want to be able to draw out very thin lines with it. So make sure you can get a nice clean stroke. You can see there those lines are pretty nice and thin and consistent. So it's ready to go. And what we do is just draw those lines around the outer edges. So I'll start with the helmet. Flow Improver also slows the drying time of the paint a little bit longer, so it gives you more time with a small amount of paint on your brush to really work in your detail. If you don't have Flow Improver, you can use water. Future Floor Polish also works really well. Don't ask me why. Water's not the best idea because paint tends to actually float on water rather than mix with it properly. But it doesn't a pinch, and it's certainly better than just using it straight out of the pot or out of the bottle or straight off your palette, however you use your paint. Some areas are trickier to highlight than others. Now the next thing we want to highlight is there's this line of detail across the helmet. We want to highlight both sides of that as well. If you find your highlight is too subtle, if you want a more sharp, defined highlight, just mix a little bit of white or a light blue or something to just lighten that color up a bit. Notice that the highlights I've added across the top just really aren't showing up. It's not bad across here, you can really kind of see the edge just catching light. But across the top here, it's almost non-existent. So I'm going to add just a tiny, tiny drop I'm actually going to add a little bit of Ashen Blue, which is the brighter shade of Templar Blue. I'm just going to lighten that up just a touch. Now I've added more paint, so I should be adding some more flow improver as well, because otherwise I've just thickened the paint up. That looks a bit better. And just nice thin lines, take your time. You can see it's a much more defined highlight now. How sharp you want your highlight is really up to you. Sometimes a subtle highlight's all you need. It's always easier to start with the subtle highlight and then move to a brighter one if you need to. It's kind of hard to go the other way. A lighter highlight also really pronounces the, like in this case, there's the crevice in the middle here. And it almost looks like there's a shadow there, even though it's really the same color as the rest of the helmet. If you're trying to paint an army really quickly, I wouldn't recommend using highlighting. Probably just want to go start with a lighter color and then add a dark wash to get your definition instead. Won't be quite as detailed, but you can pump out a lot more models in a short period of time that way. And this method will take me close to a few hours a model. If you look at that head though, I think it really is worth the time and the effort involved. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish highlighting the rest of the model with that color. But you can see now that helmet really has a lot more pop to it. That line across the top is really well defined. And it's also just lightened the head up a little bit. It does look like it's a lighter shade than the rest of the model, even though it's not. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to highlight the rest of the edges of the armor, and then we'll start highlighting the black places as well. And when you're highlighting, it's actually possible to highlight too much. You notice here some of my brush strokes ended up really thick, and it's almost taking over the base color. All you need to do there is just go back and get a little bit of your base color on a fine brush and just touch the lines up. Basically just paint from the inside out towards the highlight, just to make the highlight smaller. And it doesn't really take much to clean those lines up, just a couple seconds to bring the inner color paint back out towards the edge so our highlights aren't so pronounced. So we've got a much cleaner highlight there now. You know, for highlighting the black areas, we don't want to step straight into a gray, usually. Most grays are just, and here's pure black. This is the rainy gray that is sort of Reaper's next shade, and that's just far too deep a step. And the gray will stand out far too much, so we're going to want to 50-50 these two together. So we're going to take a few drops of Reaper Pure Black, and about an equal amount of Reaper Rainy Gray, and then just a small amount of Flow Improver. And just mix that all together. If it still looks too black, just add in a little bit more of the gray. I'm not quite happy with that shade yet. And you should just be able to draw fairly thin lines with that if it's the right consistency. So we get what we want there. So we just want to more or less do the same thing and just pick out edge details, places where light would collect. And not that light really collects, but things that would look better if they were defined. Especially want to do this between two adjacent details that are black, just to help set them apart. Particularly when you're highlighting things that are black, you normally want to just do a handful of the details first, and then just step back and look at it and make sure that the highlight looks proper. It's not far too bright or not noticeable at all. Black is one of the harder colors to really get a good highlight on, just because it can be really difficult to just get that shade of gray where you really want it. Once you've done it once or twice though, you'll really get the hang of it, and it just becomes kind of second nature at that point. But it is one of the hardest colors when you're first painting to highlight properly. I'm not suggesting you don't try it, it's definitely worth trying. Just be aware that you might be doing it once or twice before you really get the results you want. And just like highlighting with other colors, if we get our highlights too big where they're actually blocking up details or covering up the area we meant to highlight, we can go back with just some plain black and clean that up. Okay, so you can see now I've got the highlighting done on the gun and this glove. And it's pretty subtle, but it just helps break up the blackness a little bit and helps define the individual details. You can kind of see a lot more separation here now than you could before. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish up doing the same thing on his legs, and then we'll get to actually doing the stealth effect. Okay, so I've finished highlighting all of the black at this point now. Some detail across the back of the boots. Again, just to really make the certain edges stand out, make them have a little more punch. You can see in here, just right across here, across the back. And it really just by bringing out all of these sort of exposed edges, just helps make the different areas of the model that more pronounced. It makes it look like light really is grabbing on and those edges really are more defined. It just gives the model a much more complete look. So that's the end of this video. In the next video here, we're going to go ahead and show you how to do the stealth effect, which is pretty awesome. It's actually really deceptively simple, but you really want a painted model before you go ahead and do it. So we'll start into that shortly.